The night was unusually cold for early autumn, the kind of chill that crept under your skin and lingered there, no matter how tightly you wrapped your arms around yourself. At the corner of the street, where a single bus stop waited under the dim light of a flickering lamp, Daniel stood with his hands tucked deep in his pockets. He was used to waiting. He always said that life itself was a series of waits, waiting for chances, waiting for paychecks, waiting for someone to notice the effort you quietly gave. That night, he was simply waiting for the last bus that would take him back to his small rented apartment. The rain fell in fine threads, steady and cold. Drops rolled down the glass walls of the bus shelter, blurring the city lights into trembling patches of gold and red. Daniel's jacket, though old, gave him enough warmth to bear the damp chill. But beside him stood a stranger, a woman, who was clearly not dressed for such weather. She looked to be in her early 30s, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks, her thin business suit doing little to shield her from the cold. She hugged her handbag against her chest, as if that alone could keep the shivers away. Daniel tried not to stare, but he noticed how her shoulders trembled with every gust of wind. She looked proud, almost stubborn, as if unwilling to admit she was freezing. There was something in that quiet struggle that tugged at him. He hesitated only a moment. Then, slowly, he slipped the jacket from his shoulders. His hands trembled, slightly, not from the cold, but from the uncertainty of how she might react. He cleared his throat, the words almost catching. "Here," he said gently, holding out the jacket. The woman blinked in surprise, her tired eyes lifting to meet his. For a moment, it seemed as though she might refuse out of pride, but then another shiver ran through her, betraying her need. Quietly, she accepted it. She slid her arms into the jacket, her expression softening with a gratitude she couldn't put into words. Daniel said nothing more. He just gave her a small, reassuring nod. Neither of them knew that this single act of kindness, on an ordinary rainy night, would begin to change both of their lives. The growl of an approaching engine broke the quiet at the bus stop. Headlights cut through the curtain of rain as the last bus of the night pulled in, its doors opening with a weary hiss. Daniel stepped back, motioning for the woman to board first. She hesitated only briefly, then gave a small nod of thanks before climbing the steps, her heels clicking softly against the metal floor. The warmth inside the bus rushed out, brushing Daniel's face as he followed behind her. The bus was nearly empty. A couple of passengers dozed against the windows, their reflections blurred by raindrops. The air smelled faintly of wet coats and the hum of tired machinery. Daniel slipped into a seat near the middle, setting his worn backpack on his lap. The woman sat just across from him, his jacket wrapped snugly around her shoulders. It dwarfed her frame slightly, yet the relief on her face was unmistakable. For a while, silence lingered between them, filled only by the soft rumble of the bus moving through puddled streets. Daniel glanced at her once, then quickly looked away, not wanting to intrude. But the woman finally broke the silence, her voice quiet yet firm. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her eyes meeting his. Daniel offered a small smile. "Maybe, but you looked cold." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to read the truth behind his simple words. Then her lips curved into the faintest smile and expression that seemed rare for her. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel nodded, not knowing what else to add. He wasn't the type to fill silence with unnecessary chatter. Instead, he let the moment rest between them, gentle and unhurried. Outside, the rain streaked the windows, each drop catching the passing streetlights like threads of silver. The bus rumbled on, carrying them through the quiet city. Though they were strangers, something subtle had shifted in the air between them. A fragile connection, built not on grand gestures, but on a simple act of kindness. Daniel leaned his head against the cool glass, closing his eyes for a moment. He didn't know her name, her story, or why she had been standing alone at the bus stop so late. But he knew this sometimes the smallest decisions carried the weight of unseen futures, and tonight, he had unknowingly stepped into one of those moments. For a few minutes, silence filled the bus. The only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the steady patter of rain against the windows. Daniel leaned slightly toward the glass, watching the blurred lights of the city slide past. His reflection stared back at him faintly, tired but calm. He had nearly settled into quiet when he heard her voice again. "You must be freezing now," she said gently, glancing at his shirt sleeves. Daniel gave a small shrug, a modest smile tugging at his lips. "I've handled worse. Besides, I think you needed it more than I did." The woman tilted her head, studying him. There was something about him. His manner was unhurried, his tone free of expectation. She seemed used to people wanting something in return, yet here he was, simply giving. Most people wouldn't bother, she murmured, her fingers brushing the fabric of the jacket, as if surprised by its warmth. Daniel chuckled softly. Maybe, most people should. That answer caught her off guard, and for the first time, a quiet laugh slipped past her guarded expression. It was soft, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't used to laughing freely with strangers. "What's your name?" she asked after a pause. "Daniel," he replied, sitting a little straighter. "And you?" There was a hesitation, just a beat too long before she answered. Claire. Daniel nodded, repeating it quietly under his breath, as though committing it to memory. "Nice to meet you, Claire." Her gaze lingered on him, curious now. He was different from the men she usually met in her world, men with sharp words, polished shoes, and practiced smiles. Daniel was none of those things. His jacket was old, his shoes scuffed, his hands slightly rough, and yet there was an honesty in his presence, a gentleness that felt rare. "Do you always give away your jacket to strangers at bus stops?" she asked, half teasing. Daniel grinned faintly, shaking his head. "No, just this once." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something quiet and unspoken passed between them, an understanding. Fragile but real. The bus carried on, and the city stretched endlessly outside, but for Daniel and Claire, the world had narrowed to this small exchange, two strangers, bound together for now by the rain, the bus ride, and a jacket that meant more than either of them yet realized. The bus swayed gently as it rolled through the quiet streets, every stop drawing them further into the heart of the night. Claire sat silently for a while, her gaze fixed on the streaks of rain sliding across the window. Her reflection stared back at her faintly, pale and tired, with shadows beneath her eyes. She pressed her lips together, as if weighing whether to speak or to keep her silence. At last her voice broke, through the hum of the engine. "It's been a long day." Daniel turned slightly toward her, sensing something heavier beneath those simple words. He didn't rush her, he just waited, patient and attentive. Claire's fingers traced the strap of her handbag. "A meeting I couldn't afford to miss. Then my car broke down on the other side of the city, and when I finally thought I could catch a cab home, not one would stop for me." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "So here I am, drenched and stranded at a bus stop at midnight, wearing a stranger's jacket." Her tone was dry, but there was vulnerability beneath it. Daniel smiled gently. "Life has a way of testing us on the worst days." She glanced at him, studying his calm expression. "And you, what were you doing out there so late?" "Work," he said simply. "The shop I help at closes late. Sometimes I don't get out until after everyone else has already gone home." Claire tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her tired eyes. "You don't mind?" Daniel shrugged lightly. "It's honest work. It pays the rent. That's enough." For now, she looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. Something about his simplicity, his lack of complaint, unsettled her. In her world, people chased status, promotions, titles, and yet here was someone who seemed content with less, yet carried a quiet dignity that many of them lacked. The bus rattled over a pothole, and she steadied herself with a hand against the seat. Then, almost in a whisper, she added, "You're different, Daniel." He blinked, caught off guard. "Different how?" She smiled faintly, turning her gaze back to the window. "Just different. In a good way." Daniel said nothing more, but inside, her words lingered, warming him far more than the jacket he no longer wore. The bus rolled on, its engine humming steadily as the streets grew emptier with each passing block. A soft chime sounded, and the digital sign above the driver flickered to life, announcing the next stop. Daniel shifted in his seat, recognizing the familiar name. It was his stop, the one that would lead him home to his small apartment, his bed waiting, his long day finally over. But as he glanced at Claire, wrapped in his jacket and staring absently out the rain-streaked window, something in him hesitated. She looked tired, not just from the day, but from something deeper. "This is where I usually get off," he said quietly. Claire turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Then don't let me keep you. You've already done more than enough." Daniel shook his head slightly. "It's late. The streets aren't always safe this time of night. Where are you headed?" She hesitated, then admitted, "A few more stops down." Not far, but I'm not sure I like the idea of walking alone from there. Daniel nodded, as if the decision was already made. Then I'll stay until you stop. No trouble. Her brows lifted slightly. You don't even know me. Why would you bother? Asterisk. He gave her a small, steady smile. Maybe I don't need a reason. For a moment, Claire just looked at him, caught off guard by the simplicity of his answer. She was used to people who calculated everything, what they could gain, what they might lose. But Daniel's words held no angle, no hidden motive, just quiet sincerity. You're strange, she said softly, though her voice carried no insult. Daniel chuckled. I've been called worse. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, the streets glistening under the glow of street lamps. The bus rocked gently, carrying them closer to her stop. Claire shifted in her seat, her expression thoughtful now. Somewhere, inside her, a wall she always kept tightly built began to show a small crack. It was a simple thing, really just someone choosing to sit a little longer, to make sure she was safe. But sometimes, the simplest things touched the heart most deeply, and though neither of them said it aloud, something had already begun to change between them. The bus sighed as it came to a stop, its doors folding open to let the night air in. Claire rose first, still wrapped in Daniel's jacket, and stepped down onto the wet pavement. The rain had eased, leaving behind only the soft scent of damp earth and asphalt. Daniel followed, his worn shoes splashing lightly in a shallow puddle as he landed beside her. The bus pulled away with a low rumble, its lights fading into the distance, leaving the street quiet and still. You really didn't have to, Claire said softly, adjusting the jacket around her shoulders. Daniel smiled faintly, sliding his hands into his pockets. It's fine. I don't live far from here anyway. A short walk won't hurt. She gave him a skeptical glance. You're soaked through, Daniel. Nothing a warm shower won't fix, he replied lightly. They began to walk side by side down the glistening street. The street lamps above cast long shadows on the ground, broken by puddles that reflected their figures. Claire slipped off her heels with a sigh, carrying them in one hand as her bare feet touched the cool pavement. Those look like torture devices, Daniel remarked, nodding toward the heels. She let out a soft laugh, quiet but genuine. You're not wrong. I wear them because I'm supposed to look the part. The part? Daniel asked curiously. Claire hesitated, then waved her hand vaguely. Professional, put together, like I've got everything under control, even when I don't. Her words hung in the cool night air, heavier than she had intended. For a moment, she looked away, as if regretting her honesty. But Daniel didn't press. He just walked quietly beside her, his calm presence oddly comforting. You don't have to pretend with me, he said after a pause, his tone gentle. Claire's steps slowed slightly, her gaze flicking toward him. There was no judgment in his voice, only quiet understanding, and somehow, that felt rarer than anything she had known in a long while. The city around them seemed softer now, quieter, as though holding its breath for this fragile exchange. Two strangers, sharing a stretch of night, their footsteps echoing together on rain-washed streets. And for Claire, the weight she carried felt just for a moment a little lighter. Their footsteps slowed as they reached the corner where the street opened up to a tall apartment building. Its polished glass doors glimmered faintly under the glow of street lamps, standing in contrast to the quiet simplicity of the walk they had just shared. Claire stopped, turning slightly toward Daniel. For a moment, she simply stood there, her pliff dangling from her hand, his jacket draped loosely around her shoulders. This is me, she said softly. Daniel nodded, his gaze lifting briefly to the building before returning to her. Then I guess this is where I leave you. A silence settled between them, delicate and uncertain. Claire studied him, this man, who had given her warmth without hesitation, who had walked with her through the damp streets as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Thank you, Daniel, she said after a pause. Her voice carried more weight than the simple words themselves. He gave a small smile. It was nothing. No, she insisted gently. It wasn't nothing. People don't usually care, not without a reason. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Maybe the world would be better if they did. Her eyes lingered on him, thoughtful, almost searching. She wanted to ask more, to understand what made him so different from the people she usually met. But the hour was late, and a part of her hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much too soon. Instead, she held the jacket tighter around her frame. I'll make sure this gets back to you, she said, a hint of promise in her tone. Daniel chuckled softly. "Don't worry about it. Stay warm. That's enough for me." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes betrayed something else, reluctance, as though she wasn't quite ready to say goodbye. For Daniel, it was simpler. He had not expected this night to unfold the way it had. Yet here he was, standing outside the home of a stranger who no longer felt like one. "Good night, Claire," he said finally, his voice steady and kind. "Good night, Daniel," she replied. He turned, beginning to walk back into the quiet street, his figure growing smaller beneath the street. Claire stood at the entrance, watching him go, her heart caught between gratitude and curiosity. Something about him lingered, even after he disappeared into the night. The morning light streamed through tall glass windows, reflecting off polished floors and sleek steel beams. The building was alive with movement assistants carrying files, phones ringing softly, conversations buzzing in every corner. At the top floor, in a spacious conference room, Claire sat at the head of a long table. But this Claire was different from the woman Daniel had met at the bus stop. Gone was the weary figure shivering in the rain. Here, she was composed, commanding, her voice steady as she addressed the group of executives before her. "We need to finalize the proposal by next week," she said firmly. "No delays. This client could change the direction of the company for years to come." The men and women around the table nodded, taking notes, their eyes fixed on her with respect. For Claire was not just another employee, she was the CEO. Her presence filled the room, sharp and undeniable. Yet, behind her calm authority, she carried a quiet memory from the night before, a memory that softened her edges in ways no one here could see. Her gaze drifted briefly to the side, to the simple jacket folded neatly over the back of her chair. Daniel's jacket. It looked out of place among the sleek decor of her office, yet somehow it grounded her. She remembered the bus stop, the rain, the way he had offered it, without hesitation, without asking who she was or what she could give. In return, he hadn't known her title, her company, her wealth. To him, she had been just a woman in need of warmth, and that had meant more than all the polished courtesy she received in boardrooms like this one. "Claire," one of the executives prompted, pulling her back from her thoughts. She blinked, then refocused, her voice steady once again. "Let's move on to the budget review." The meeting continued, efficient and precise, but inside, Claire's mind lingered elsewhere. She thought of Daniel walking away into the night, soaked and jacketless, and wondered if she'd ever see him again. And for the first time in years, amid the endless decisions and responsibilities that weighed on her, she felt something unexpected, a quiet longing, not for success, not for approval, but for the simple kindness of a man who had expected nothing in return. The city looked different in the morning. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean and shining under the gentle sun. Daniel stood outside the small hardware shop where he worked, unlocking the door with practiced ease. His backpack hung loosely from his shoulder, his shirt, sleeves rolled up. To him, it was just another ordinary day work. Customers, routine, but fate had something else in mind. From the corner of the street, Claire appeared. She walked with her usual quiet confidence, her polished heels clicking against the pavement. In her arms, folded neatly, was his jacket. Daniel looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly softening into something warmer. Claire's lips curved faintly, though her eyes carried a mixture of hesitation and anticipation. "You forgot something," she said gently as she approached, lifting the jacket slightly. Daniel chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I told you to keep it." "I couldn't," she replied, her voice firm yet soft. "It's yours. Besides, I wanted to see you again." Her honesty hung in the air, startling both of them with its simplicity. Daniel's expression shifted, touched by her words. He took the jacket, brushing his fingers lightly over hers as he did. The contact was brief, but it carried a spark neither of them could ignore. "How are you?" he asked, his tone careful but genuine. "Better," Claire admitted. "Because of you. Last night. It meant more than you know." Daniel smiled, his eyes steady on hers. "I'm glad." The street around them carried on, cars passing, people hurrying to work, but in that moment, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Claire glanced at the small shop behind him, curiosity flickering in her gaze. "So this is where you work?" "Yeah," Daniel said, with a hint of modest pride. "It's not much, but it's honest." Claire studied him, her thoughts hidden behind her calm expression. She saw in him what so many in her world lacked: authenticity. And as she stood there, in the daylight, seeing him not as a stranger in the rain but as the man he truly was, she knew this was only the beginning. The cafe was warm, its windows fogged slightly from the heat within. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, wrapping around them like a gentle blanket. Daniel sat across from Claire. The jacket that had once begun it all, now draped casually over the chair. He stirred his coffee absently, his eyes lifting to meet hers every so often. And each time, he found her smiling more easily than before. The weight she had carried the night they met, seeming lighter now. Claire rested her chin against her hand, studying him with quiet curiosity. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. Daniel raised a brow. "Expected?" She laughed softly. "Most people I meet are different. Always in a rush to impress. Always wanting something in return. You're not like that." Daniel shrugged lightly. "I don't know how to be anyone else." Her smile lingered, soft and genuine. For years, Claire had lived in a world of sharp edges, meetings, deadlines, polished conversations. But Daniel had shown her something else, a quiet steadiness, a kindness that asked for nothing back. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I never told you what I do. Does it matter?" Daniel asked, his tone calm, almost teasing. Claire tilted her head, a spark of amusement in her eyes. "Maybe not. But if it does, I run a company. A rather large one." Daniel blinked, then let out a low laugh. "Figures. You carry yourself like someone important. Does that change anything?" she asked quietly, searching his expression. He shook his head without hesitation. "Not to me." The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard, warming her in a way success never had. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee. The world outside moving on without them, to people from different worlds, one who had almost nothing, one who had nearly everything. Yet here, at this small cafe table, they found themselves on equal ground. Sometimes, life changed not through grand gestures, but through small kindnesses. A jacket offered on a cold night, a walk through rain-washed streets, a conversation that lingered long after the words ended. Claire lifted her cup in a quiet toast. "To unexpected nights," she said softly. Daniel smiled, raising his own. "And to what comes next." And as their cups touched, the story of two strangers brought together by the rain, by kindness, by chance began its next chapter.